Okay, welcome everybody. Let's get started. Um, Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to join us here. And when I had heard Ed telling me he was putting together this presentation for psychiatry about gratitude and positive psychology, and I thought, that's something we could use more of these days, especially going through such a divisive time, in our country. So we're recording the meeting and it will be kind of post-production edited and put up on our website. Please remember to take the survey. There's a QR code there because we look at that and always seek to improve. So I want to welcome Dr. Edward MacPhee and Dr. Amy Dreier, who have graciously agreed to give this presentation. So Ed is he's a trauma psychiatrist and associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry. He and I came to know each other because we were working on trying to fix some stuff at Cedar. He works closely with the psychiatry trainees in the inpatient, outpatient settings and oversees the hospital-based parts of the adult division of the Department of Psychiatry. Dr. MacPhee considers himself to be a therapist first and a prescriber second. He's an integrationist and is especially interested in how psychiatry, psychotherapy, and positive psychology can be incorporated into psychiatric treatment. Dr. Amy Dreier is a licensed psychologist, assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry using University College School of Medicine. She specializes in delivering evidence-based therapies for a variety of psychiatric conditions with a specialty in trauma PTSD. And in addition to therapy, Dr. Dreier also provides psychological assessment, psychotherapy training, and supervision for psychiatry residents and psychology trainees. And she's involved in a bunch of quality improvement projects. Dr. Dreier is also the director of psychology for the adult division of the Department of Psychiatry. In case you didn't know, that's a huge department. And they are here today with information about the psychology of gratitude, which we thought in November, coming up on Thanksgiving, this is a particularly good time to look at this. Okay. They do this when you're done.
Great. Do I need to switch anything? Good to go. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and participating today because we will have some participation exercises. I will go ahead and get us started. We don't have any disclosures. Our learning objectives today, we're going to introduce positive psychology in general to give you all some background regarding the research that's supporting the topics of savoring and gratitude that we'll dig into more detail. So we'll summarize that scientific background and give you some practical strategies that you can use as well as share with anybody that you're working with. So let's start off with just talking about what is positive psychology. So these two fellas that you'll see up here are Martin Seligman and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I've looked up numerous times to make sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, but they're kind of the founding fathers of the field of positive psychology, which is sort of an outgrowth in the last few decades that has started to look at how can we reframe the way psychology is looking at mental health and really focusing on the health side of things. And are there interventions we can start to do that are focused on health that really can enhance people's well-being? So the philosophy behind the field of positive psychology is that it looks at valued subjective experiences of the individual and of the collective. And so for the individual, it's looking at sort of three temporal frames, which is in the past. And so it's looking at things like well-being, contentment, and satisfaction for where we've been. It's looking at the future and having hope and optimism. And then in the present, it looks at things like flow and happiness. So if you've ever heard the term flow, that comes from Csikszentmihalyi, and he's written a book called Flow. And I believe Ed's going to talk a little bit more about flow as well. It's a big kind of central factor. Okay, that's just on here. All right. In the field of positive psychology. And so in the individual aspect, it's looking at traits. things like compassion and creativity and generativity and originality, and things that kind of make our lives worth living. There's a lot of focus on meaning in positive psychology. And at the group level, it's looking at things like civic virtues and institutions that can move us towards better citizenship. So altruism, civility, modernization, tolerance. So this is sort of the underlying philosophy, but what does that mean in practice for positive psychology? So what someone practicing from a positive psychology lens is going to be doing is it's focusing on not just treating what is broken, but it's nurturing what's best or nurturing strengths in the individual, which was one of the things that psychology really focused on when it was a burgeoning field a century ago. So it used to be that we had sort of had three core missions. One was curing illness, but the other two were making lives more productive and fulfilling, as well as recognizing and nurturing talent in people in order to facilitate contribution to society as a whole. And in looking back kind of historically, after World War II, what we found is that the focus really shifted to a disease framework and curing illness. And that's where from the 40s up through the 90s and until today, most of our research is focused on, has been on evidence-based practices for addressing depression, addressing anxiety, addressing PTSD. So it's been a really focus on like the disease component. And so in positive psychology, what we're really focused on is allowing psychologists to understand and build factors that allow individuals, communities, and societies to flourish. So one of the foundational books that Martin Seligman wrote is called Flourish. That's the title. It's an excellent text. And really that kind of encapsulates what the whole field is trying to do. It's helping the individual and the community to live their best lives. And that really has grown into, over the past couple of decades, all the research that's been done in positive psychology, into developing an actual positive psychotherapy. So there is a manual with 15 sessions that you can use with clients to really build on these concepts. And the idea is not to focus on what's wrong, but it's to focus on what is good and what's going well in order to alleviate stress. So it's a bit of a paradigm shift where we're helping them build on strengths with the secondary goal of that alleviating stress instead of going after the stress directly. And in these 15 sessions, each session focuses on kind of a different positive trait or value, if you will. Two of them being gratitude, which is sprinkled through the whole thing, and the other being savoring. And those are the things that we're going to focus on today. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. MacPhee to talk about savoring.
So one thing that I'll add about the positive psychotherapy is that it appears to work just as well as any other form of psychotherapy. So if you were to compare traditional CBT to positive psychotherapy, it appears to work just as well. So just worth mentioning. So let's talk a little bit about savoring today as kind of the first topic here. And I think that there's something to this quote from Emerson from the 19th century, more a difference in the quality of our pleasures than in the amount. And this is actually something that's borne out in the research. The quality of the experience, the depth, the totality of the experience is more important than the frequency of the positive experience. So let's talk a little bit about the positive and negatives in our lives. We are definitely biased towards the negative experiences in our lives. I think this is something that we all recognize. And we experience them in the form of suffering, whether it's physical suffering, such as pain or discomfort, or it could be emotional suffering, such as sadness, anger, or fear. And this makes a decent amount of sense, right? You know, you want to have a system that tells you something is not going the way you want it to, and that you should probably do something to address it. Okay, makes perfect sense. But what about the positive experiences that we have? I think that there's kind of an overall lack of a counterpart to how we deal with the negative experiences. We don't really have a great way of conceptualizing and working with the positive experiences. And as a result, we can actually miss out on them, such as feeling energized after a good run. Spiritual experiences, such as being out in Mother Nature, joy, love, excitement. we don't usually talk about how do we capture them and make good use of them, optimal use of them, so that we can flourish. And that's where savoring comes in. Savoring actually predates the positive psychology movement. It started in the 1980s with the research. And the two primary researchers in the area, Bryant and Verhoff, kind of culminated with their book, Savoring, a New Model of Positive Experience, which, by the way, you can find on our library's website and download it for free. So I definitely recommend taking a look at it. They use the definition of savoring as the capacity to attend to, appreciate, and enhance the positive experience in one's life. And all of them are important. And they went on to say here that being able to handle adversity is vital in life, just like what I was talking about. But having the capacity to cope seems not to be the same as having the capacity to enjoy life. In other words, just because people are not down doesn't mean that they're up. And if you think about it, that makes a decent amount of sense. Just because you're not struggling with a physical or mental illness doesn't mean that you're actually enjoying your life, that you're actually flourishing. And that's where savoring comes into play. They created something called the Savoring Beliefs Inventory, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's a 24-question self-report questionnaire. And some of the examples here are, I enjoy looking back on happy times from my past. I know how to make the most of a good time. When something good happens, I can make my enjoyment of it last longer by thinking or doing certain things. So, Savoring Beliefs Inventory. There's been, without going into it, there's been a ton of research in the area of savoring, some of which related to the health profession, some of which not. Savoring can improve a wide range of things related to depression, hopelessness, anhedonia, anxiety, schizophrenia, substance use, coping with cancer and other illnesses. But it expands, it has a broader breadth than that. And we see research in areas such as organizational behaviors, marketing, and education. So it's a very nice concept that can be used in a lot of different ways. The authors put forth the idea that there are two core concepts to savoring, and both of which are very important because you can't really capture savoring if you don't do these two things. The first is at least some degree of mindful awareness of the positive feelings. So it's paying attention to it. It's not just saying, oh, okay, that was cool, and then letting it just roll on by. It's saying, oh, okay, let me focus my attention on this positive experience while it's happening. It's described as being a meta-awareness, kind of an overall awareness of your positive feelings. And if you don't have this attentional component, then it becomes pleasurable enjoyment. As I said, something where you say, okay, that's great, and then it just rolls on by. So that's really important core concept here. And then the second one is the management and regulation of the positive experience. The initial research looked at the upregulation of the positive emotions, but over time, the research became more nuanced and also looked at the decrease in the responses that dampen positive feelings. So it's a bit of both, right? So the things that we can do that enhance the experience and decrease the negatives. And we'll get back to that concept a little bit later in my part of the talk. The authors put forth that there are 9 techniques for savoring. I've added in a 10th one because it fits nicely with kind of the way that I approach psychotherapy. And I think that we use all of them some of the time, but maybe not as well as we could because we often miss that attentional component. And I would roughly categorize them as being cognitive, behavioral, and experiential, which also roughly categorize with the different types of psychotherapy that are out there. And the authors created something called the Ways of Savoring checklist, which is helpful because it can help you to identify the ways in which you use to savor and give you opportunities to see what other ways you could savor. So let's go through the 10 different types of savoring. The first that they talk about is sharing with others, which is an interesting one because we do this, right? Like go home at the end of the day and share with your family like, oh, hey, this really cool thing or this great thing happened. That's sharing the experience. And the authors make this interesting analogy that I think is a good one, that it's similar to using social supports when you're feeling distress. right? That you talk about the problems that you're experiencing, but you can also talk about the positives that you've had, and it can have a beneficial effect. And if anything, it's the single strongest predictor of the level of enjoyment. So if you're going to do any of the savoring techniques, sharing with others is actually the most powerful of the bunch. And like I'm talking about here, you can do it after the fact. You don't have to do it in the moment. You could go home and talk about it with the people that you care about. The second one is my way of doing it here, and this is going to be the example we get to in a couple of minutes, which would be a meaningful description, or if you want to, a savoring narrative, putting your experience into words. And I think there's something about capturing the experience and turning something that is experienced in putting it into words. It's a very powerful tool. And also potentially addressing why you're having the positive experience in the first place so that you can kind of reflect on the experience and gain some understanding of yourself in the process. As I said, we'll get back to this one. The third is memory building, taking mental photographs. I think this is something that we do, but it's not something that we do frequently. I know I don't, but kind of highlighting those aspects that we find most enjoyable. Now, this book was written in 2007. So nowadays you could easily say, okay, well, cameras on cell phones are ubiquitous. Why don't we just take a picture of it? And I think there's something to it. But I also think that there's something to be said about the mental effort of kind of capturing it and putting it into your hippocampus eventually. The fourth is self-congratulation, praising yourself or having pride, cognitive basking, if you will. And we do that. Yay, we were able to do this. That's terrific. And I think that there's something to be said about having pride in what you're actually doing and not just saying, oh, good, I just finished up with that. I'm relieved. This is actually saying, you know what, I did a good job, kind of the equivalent of giving yourself a pat on the back. Obviously, you can go a little bit too far when you get into the bragging or the boasting end of the spectrum. But I think in moderation and when used appropriately, it's a very nice way of savoring. The fifth one is an experiential one. So getting out of the cognitive and behavioral realm and focusing more on the actual experience. And this is called, the fifth one is sensory perceptual sharpening. So focusing on certain stimuli and blocking out others. So I've been an audiophile for way too long at this point here. And one of the simple things that I do is when I'm listening to music, I will just close my eyes and really just let the music be the primary thing that I'm experiencing. And that's a perfect example of sensory perceptual sharpening. The sixth one, this is something Amy and I were talking about before we got started here. I'm a little wishy-washy about the comparing one because it's contrasting your feelings to what others feel or prior situations you've been in, which kind of leads towards a downward comparison. Yes, it can lead towards savoring, but I think it's just a way of kind of maintaining a level ground more than just savoring. But I wanted to include it for completeness sake. The seventh one is absorption, which is another experiential one, an experiential immersion, getting totally engrossed in the moment. I was listening to a Detroit techno track. I've been into electronic music for 30 years, so I'm just old at this point now. And the refrain in the track is break you down and get you into the groove. And I think that's exactly it, that you stop paying attention to everything else and you're just absorbed in what you're listening to. And this has some overlap with flow, and no, I am not going to try to pronounce the last name there, but that idea of the optimal experience where you're just totally engrossed in what you're doing. And there's obviously some overlap with mindfulness too, that you're shutting off the thinking part of your brain and you're just really absorbed in what's going on in the moment. The eighth one is behavioral expression, jumping up and down with joy, kind of doing the Kermit the Frog sort of hand waving, laughing, whatever it ends up being. Usually a very spontaneous sort of thing, which can cause problems with paying attention to it because you don't even know that you're going to do it. The example that kind of comes to my mind here is Amy is a big Avs fan. And what happens when, the Avs score? Well, the crowd erupts and everyone's really happy. It's a behavioral expression. It's also a bit of sharing with others too, right? So you can blend some of these types of savoring together. The ninth one is temporal awareness, which I also find to be interesting. It sounds kind of like it comes from Stoicism, and it probably does. Reminding yourself of the fleetingness of the moment, wishing that the moment could last for forever, which kind of hits on the preciousness of time, that this moment will not last for forever, and I need to capture it. I need to savor it. Maybe take that mental image that I had talked about previously. And then the final one, interestingly, is counting blessings or gratitude. And Amy and I have also talked about this one here. There's probably some validity to calling it a form of savoring, but there's a big overlap between, or there's a difference between gratitude and savoring. There's some overlap. You can think of it like a Venn diagram, but it's not one and the same. And we'll obviously get back to this. Like I mentioned before, there are ways in which we can limit our ability to savoring. And we're all guilty of these. I am as well. The first is just not paying attention, that first core concept of just, having it be a pleasurable experience, and then it just passes right on by. Why do we do this? Because we're in a rush. You could be eating a wonderful meal right now that you're quite happy with, but you're busy doing other things such as listening to us, and you're not really taking the opportunity to savor. So thinking of like a typical Thanksgiving feast or something like that, taking the time to actually really savor and appreciate a wonderful meal, that would be part of it. This is also one where Ferris Bueller's advice kind of came to mind. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. The third comes more from a psychotherapy perspective here of emotional numbing or experiential avoidance. When people are suffering with sadness or anxiety, they tend to dampen their emotions. It's kind of a way of avoiding their emotions. But when you try to avoid your negative emotions, you also tend to limit the positive experiences too. You dampen the entire system as opposed to just aspects of it. And it becomes a lot easier to miss out on the positive experiences. And then the fourth is killjoy thinking, which has been well known to happen with depression. Thinking of the things you should have been doing or ways that you should have been better. I couldn't help but think of Karen Ornai's concept of the tyranny of the should. And this can really get in the way of savoring as well. I'm sure that there are others, but these were the ones that kind of popped to my mind here. A few other things that are worth mentioning about savoring. One, like I said, you can combine the techniques. I've used a couple of examples of that, but I think that most of the forms of savoring here can be combined with gratitude. Gratitude is kind of a good bookend to whatever form of savoring that you're doing. Is like, wow, I just had this great experience. Thank you. Who you're thanking, it doesn't necessarily matter. Just thank you to life, the universe, and everything. Interestingly, savoring is atemporal, so you can do it for things that have happened in the past, things that are happening at present, or things that will happen in the future, such as like, I know I'm going to have a really good meal tonight. So you can savor that ahead of time, which is really good. And obviously, practicing helps, right? It's the more that you practice it, the easier it will become, particularly the attentional component. And both practicing it while something happens, and then maybe at the end of the day saying, okay, what are those things I want to re-savor? So let's go through an exercise. This is the front part of the handout here, the meaningful description or savoring narrative. I'm going to go through an example here for myself, something that happened over the weekend, to kind of give you an example of what this ends up being like. And you can do this mentally, you can do it in writing, you can do it out loud. I'm doing it out loud for you guys, but all of those work, I think, equally well. It's just a matter of putting it into words. So the first step is recalling something positive that's happened recently. So for me over the weekend, it was going out for a walk in the snow with my dog. We have a Alaskan Klekai, which you can kind of think of as being a mini husky. And yeah, obviously she enjoys the snow. So what was the situation? Well, my dog hadn't taken a walk in a while there because it kept snowing for days on end. And so I decided to take her for a walk, and we have a nice pathway by our house that's through kind of nature, some woods, that sort of thing. Very pretty under under normal circumstances, but it took on a different light with a snow. And it was also kind of interesting walking through about a foot of snow there where nobody else had walked previously. Allowing myself to re-experience the event, kind of capturing it, recapturing it in my imagination, which I think is an important aspect of this. And then what am I experiencing here? The sensory aspects, looking at the white snow, seeing my puppy having a wonderful time and trying to take me for a run with it. So seeing nature all around in a different way than I normally would. The emotions would be bliss, serenity, whatever it is, just getting away from everything. And then the thoughts, which would be kind of just, wow, don't get a chance to experience this very often because we often don't get a foot plus of snow, but we did over by where I live. Why was this a positive experience? Well, I like walking my dog. I like being out in Mother Nature. And then just having that unique experience that I hadn't had previously with my puppy, there was something to be said about that. The sixth part is, in my mind, optional, but I think it's an important one because it allows you to learn from your experience, kind of a reflective learning, if you will. So what can you learn from this experience? And for me, I learned, just how important being out there with Mother Nature is and how much I enjoy the snow. There are a good number of parts of the country I just wouldn't care to live in because I do like the snow. And this was kind of one of the take-home messages for me. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to kind of do this on your own. It looks like we're doing fine in terms of time. So why don't we take a minute or two and you can kind of practice this on your own, write it out, do it in your head, talk with somebody else, however you want to do it. And then we'll restarted in a minute or two. You have about another 30 seconds or so here. I see that still a lot of people are writing here. So, but in the interest of time, I want to make sure that Amy has enough time to actually do this here. But yeah, so this is savoring. And I know for myself here, when Amy and I did this grand rounds last year, we did it strictly on gratitude, and we didn't have the savoring component. This has been something that I've been getting into a lot more over this past year, and I think that there's something really powerful to it in terms of just the powerful tool that we can incorporate into our lives. So, without further ado, I will hand things over to Amy, who will be talking about gratitude.
Kind of funny, as I was listening to Ed, I was reflecting on the fact that we used to work together a lot, like all day, every day. And we don't do that as much anymore. And I was standing there like, I always learn something from him when I hear it, even though we've worked together for so long. And I was learning some things as he talked. And I was like, this is not an opportunity to savor time working with a valued colleague. So I just thought I'd say that. And it kind of leads into the gratitude stuff too. So, okay. So we've been thinking about gratitude as humans for millennia, as evidenced by this quote from Cicero, that gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others. And so this is really getting at a grateful disposition or a grateful attitude can really bring about a lot of other positives and strengths. It can really facilitate a lot of well-being. And that's what we'll be talking about today, is really kind of the nitty gritty about how to do that. So per the Oxford English Dictionary, gratitude, which I love this phonetic, it just looks so funny to me with the tude part. I just think it's great. They define gratitude as a noun. So the quality of being thankful, readiness to show appreciation to, and return kindness. So it's kind of like a state of being. And in positive psychology, we talk about gratitude really as being more of an action word or a verb, where it's a process. And so think about gratitude as a two-stage process. The first step is acknowledgement of goodness. So it's really an active state of awareness versus just a state of being. And an acknowledgement of receiving something that gratifies us. And then the second step being recognizing the source is outside of ourselves. And so Emmons and McCullough, who are big researchers in the field of gratitude, say through this process, we recognize the fortune of everything that improves our lives and ourselves. And I just think that's a really cool way of looking at it. Now, this is not to say that we can't be grateful for our own internal strengths or things that we accomplish. But it is challenging us to say when we accomplish something big or when we're thankful about an internal strength, look at the things that contributed to that for us that are outside of ourselves, right? So like we can probably all relate to the fact of like getting a degree and how hard you had to work to get that degree, right? We did that. We went to school, we did the homework, we wrote the papers, we did the labs, et cetera, right? But I know for myself, when I think about achieving that goal, there was a lot of stuff that facilitated me doing that that didn't really have to do with me personally, right? Like the availability of student loans, for better and worse, was something that facilitated me to be able to do that. And I'm grateful for that, right? Or professors who were supportive, or family members who were supportive, or books, libraries, all these things. We could look at tons of stuff that contributed to our success, right? And that's part of the practice of gratitude, is it's going outside of ourselves and looking for those facilitators of the good things in our life. So I'm not going to talk about this in a ton of detail for the sake of time, but late 90s, early 2000s was when the positive psychology research really started to blow up through Martin Seligman's lab at the University of Pennsylvania. And they were focusing broadly on happiness, like what facilitates happiness for people. And really quickly, they started to hone in on gratitude as being a core component to well-being and something that can be cultivated through practice. And so they were finding repeatedly that gratitude really helped people demonstrate positive changes in well-being scores, as well as reductions in like symptom scores for things like depression or anxiety. One of the mediating factors that they were finding repeatedly was that continued participation in those activities was really important to sustain the benefit. So it's not a one and done thing. Many of the things in positive psychology aren't. They really end up being a practice that's the most important thing. So I just want to review some of the benefits of vitamin G and taking it regularly, like you have to do with any vitamin, right? Studies have found that it benefits those who are struggling with emotional pain as well as those who aren't. So it really can be applicable for anybody, no matter their situation in life. It can shift one's attention away from toxic emotions, meaning that with more practice of gratitude, the negative emotions become less toxic, right? Because there's less space for them. It can help the brain be more sensitive to gratitude, leading to better mental health in the long term. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. It can increase optimism, happiness, and well-being. And these last two are super cool, I think, because they're relational. It can increase relationship satisfaction. And if you've ever been in any kind of relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, a family relationship, people tend to like being told thank you or acknowledged for the good things they do for somebody else, right? And it can really facilitate connection to each other and increase relationship satisfaction and decrease conflict. And then relatedly, it can increase organizational satisfaction and motivation. So if you've ever worked in a place that had leadership that never praised you for anything, but always told you what you were doing wrong, did you feel good in that area? Maybe some people do, right? But not a lot of us. And then reflect on a place where you had like leadership supervision that would thank you for your contributions, or, reward you for, increased productivity or going above and beyond, right? And how that just helps you feel a little bit better and a little more motivated to keep doing what you're doing, right? So no big surprise there. Recent research into gratitude has really started to look into neural imaging. And this cool study from 2016 found that writing gratitude letters was correlated with increased neural activity in brain regions associated with empathy and theory of mind, which, if you're not familiar with the concept of theory of mind, it's essentially being able to understand that someone else's perspective is different from yours, right? Like not everybody sees the world the way I do because we all have unique experiences. So it's being able to kind of put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And writing gratitude letters increased people's ability to be able to do that. It also increased behavioral expression of gratitude and increased sensitivity to gratitude. So that essentially means the more you do it, and the more benefit you get from it. Writing gratitude letters has been correlated with better mental health scores, so reductions in depression and anxiety. However, it's not a panacea, right? I think one of the risks we run into with positive psychology is let's never talk about depression or anxiety, right? And that's probably not going to do it for everybody, right? So I always think about a gratitude practice as a supplement to other things we're doing. Ed and I are both integrationists. We tend to look at kind of holistic pictures, and this is one part of it because the findings are pretty modest. And this last bullet gets at, yes, it's helpful to people, but it tends to be the most helpful to people who already have a tendency to be a little bit more positive or optimistic. So that really enhances the effects. It's not to say that it doesn't help people who have a more negative or pessimistic outlook. It does. It just might not help them to the extent that it helps people who are already kind of like keyed that way. If that makes sense. Okay. So just like with savoring, there is a gratitude questionnaire, which the GQ6 makes me think it's like very GQ. And I'm not going to go through all this either, but what it really measures is the dispositional tendency towards gratitude. So it's not necessarily like, what's your gratitude level right now? It's like, do you tend to be somebody who will affectively experience gratitude? And the higher the score, the more tendency you have to experience gratitude. This is kind of cool because we know through research, gratitude is, we can cultivate it, we can grow it. Just like you don't either have it or you don't, like empathy. We can teach empathy, we can teach gratitude, you can practice it. And so this is a way, if you're interested in it, to kind of measure your baseline, practice it for a while and see where you get. So in other words, gratitude is like a brain muscle. And I just think the cat with the glasses is really cute. I mean, come on. Okay. So let's talk about some gratitude exercises. There is an institute out of Berkeley called the Greater Good Institute. This is where Emmons and McCullough do a lot of their research out of. And if you look on their website, there are, I didn't count, there's probably over 100 gratitude exercises on there at this point. There's at least tens and tens of them. And so we couldn't possibly go through all of them. And a lot of them are just like tweaks on others, different like iterations on a similar theme. So I sort of just wanted to highlight 3 that have A, been most borne out in research or used most in the research, and B, give you kind of a variety of practice. Like Ed was describing, a lot of them, there's cognitive exercises, there's experiential exercises, and there's behavioral exercises. So I tried to hit on 3 of them. One of them's a cognitive exercise, and it's called the 3 good things, which is what we're going to do as our practice today. So I'll come back to that one. Second is the gratitude letter, which is a behavioral exercise, but it also kind of capitalizes on some of the cognitive and experiential components. So the gratitude letter, which was referred to in some of those research studies, is where you would sit down and literally write a letter to someone that made a difference in your life. And it can be somebody who's currently in your life, it can be somebody who's passed, it can be somebody you never knew, right? But you may have heard a talk that was meaningful to you, right? It could be a stranger who did something random for you one time that was helpful, and then you never saw them again, right? So it really doesn't matter who it is. You can write this letter to anybody. And what you're going to do is you're going to write, what did they do for you? How it helped you, why it meant a difference to you, and thanking them for that thing. You can literally send this letter, or if it's a stranger or somebody who's passed, somebody you don't have the opportunity to share it with, we know that even just writing the letter has the benefits, right? There's even more benefits if you share it. So send it, and then there's even more benefits if you literally present it to them in person and share it with them face to face. And what they find is that practicing this regularly, obviously you can't do it every day, it's a pretty substantial exercise, but has all those benefits like begetting more gratitude and helping people sort of shift a frame of reference to where they start to look for things they're grateful for. And it can really combat negativity bias. Another practice is, yeah.
It also help the person who receives.
Yes, it does.
Like if we get a thank you from our patients,
Yes.
that's something that's very meaningful.
I'm glad you said that. Thank you. And then they say thank you back, and you're like, no, thank you. And then, no, you go. No, it's okay. The other one I want to mention is gratitude meditation. So this can be a little bit more of an experiential or a mindfulness practice, which is actually similar to savoring now that I think about it. The gratitude meditation is a practice of savoring where you're really focusing on something you're grateful for, a particular aspect of it, and meditating on the details and sort of allowing yourself to feel that in the moment. And it can be something really big. It can be something really small. Like you can do a gratitude/savoring meditation on how good your lunch tasted, right? All the way up through some monumental milestone. There's links in here, and there's this guided, or this link gets you to a guided gratitude meditation. So I definitely recommend you all trying it. The top one, 3 good things, is has been used a lot in the research, and I use this with clients all the time, as in whether I'm doing positive psychology specifically or it's like an adjunctive experience. Because it's simple, it's pretty quick, it's 5 minutes or less of a daily practice that can really shift somebody's perspective from having a pretty significant negativity bias where they've almost got blinders on, to opening up those blinders and starting to see their world a little more comprehensively, to include neutral and positive things. And this can be super helpful in times of increased stress, right? So like using this at the beginning of the pandemic was really helpful for some people when all they saw was viruses and threats, right? Instead, one of my favorite quotes is Mr. Rogers, who I just think is the best human, who said when he was a little kid and things felt scary, his mom told him, look for the helpers. And that really helped recognize, okay, not everything's bad. And that's what 3 good things can do. So I'll share another example. Sorry, I just like this so much. When I first learned this, I was in the Air Force at the time. And if any of you have been in the military or in that kind of setting, very high pressure, high paced, like my commander needed 3 things yesterday and I had 8 patients to see and people needed everything from me. And it was just a really rough day, right? And I walked into my office and there was a little piece of Dove chocolate sitting on my chair. And it struck me, I was like, first of all, yes, yay. And then second of all, one of my coworkers realized that I was struggling today and that maybe I needed a little pick me up. And so they put it on my chair. And that is awesome. Changed the rest of my day. Because I was able to say, I'm very grateful for that person. I still don't know who it was. I'm very grateful for that person and for them recognizing that I wasn't in a great place. And I'm probably going to be okay. I'm going to get through this. So I would definitely encourage you all to try this. Try it for a week where daily you write down 3 good things you saw, you heard, you did, you experienced. It can be anything, right? So like something you heard on the news, something, an interaction you had with people, what you had for lunch, right? It can be a big thing. It can be a small thing, doesn't matter. It can also be the absence of something bad, right? So like if you drove into work today and it took you the normal amount of time and you got here on time, that can be a good thing. Not getting stuck in traffic, right? And then you want to write down how it made you feel and why you think that thing happened. And the why you think that thing happened is really important because that's that second part of that process we talked about earlier that's helping you recognize contributors to the things you have that are outside of yourself. For some people, that's a higher power. That can be God, right? For other people, it can be the goodness of other humans. Some people, it can just be, Earth. That can be just the cosmos, like giving me a break today. It doesn't really matter, but it's recognizing that thing outside of yourself. So let's do a little practice. On the other side of your sheet, you've got 3 good things. And it's got the directions that I just walked you through right at the top. And I would encourage you just take a couple minutes and reflect on this morning up till now, and maybe yesterday, because you only have half a day's frame of reference for right now. And just write down those 3 good things that you want to recognize. I know you're probably still working on it, but for the sake of time, we just, first of all, want to express gratitude to you. And thank you for your participation today, but we also want to see if there are any questions.
Go ahead and start taking questions in the room, and then we'll go on to online.
Thank you so much. That was great. I'm a
Thanks.
long
Thank
time. Oh, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm Linda. I'm a longtime family physician. I have used gratitude journaling and practice with patients. You know, we do some of this stuff in our own practice, but I've never even run across savoring before, which I love and want to read more about. So thank you so much. I'll be doing some of that, but I'm wondering, do you have any experience of primary care physicians or other providers using savoring in their practice with patients?
Not really. I haven't. Gratitude is the one that I think most people will think of, especially during this time of year. Savoring, I think, is kind of one of the unsung heroes, if you will, of the positive psychology movement. But I don't think it's really built into most approaches. Like, as Amy was saying, gratitude is all throughout positive psychotherapy. Savoring is only a small aspect, and if my memory is serving me, it's combined with another thing in that book anyway. But I think that I agree with the authors that it's an extraordinarily powerful tool, more so than some of the other things that we see in positive psychology. Like, I think grit, for example, is extremely important, but I don't think it kind of rises to the level that savoring does, because I think it provides that balance, if you will, and gratitude to a certain extent does as well.
I think too, you deal with a lot of things that where you need behavior change, right? Whether it's exercise, nutrition, taking medications. If I would think these two things could be very powerful reinforcers for behavioral change if they were implemented as part of that. I haven't seen any research about that. It would be interesting to know if anybody has looked at that, but just an idea off the top of my head.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was great and timely. I'm wondering, these seem like very individual activities, but is there any research on what happens when you do this kind of thing in teams?
There is, and I'm not going to be able to quote specific stuff off the top of my head, but industrial organizational psychologists have looked at gratitude practices in the workplace. And that's one of the studies that I had said that it increases satisfaction. There can be like team cohesion benefits with it as well in the workplace and with teams. So.
And even though I, same as Amy, I haven't gone into the literature there, I'm pretty sure that's that organizational behavior part that I had mentioned as part of the research, because these concepts are just so broadly applicable. So it branches well outside of just traditional healthcare systems.
Yeah, just commenting on, I think one of the bullet points was about the modest effect sizes of this work and how it needs to be a part of a broader practice, right? And I think I agree with that. A lot of the positive psychologists are now talking about the conditions that you need in place in order to experience things like savoring or awe or grit. And I just think about kind of there's a reworking of the Maslow's hierarchy. He didn't actually structure it as a pyramid, but there's another humanistic psychologist, Scott Barry Kaufman, who talks about transcendence, and he works it as these basic things that you need in place are the security needs, right, in your organization or in your personal life. So things like safety. You can think of that as psychological safety. A place that fosters strong connections between people. So those are the things that I think once you have those in place, you can kind of build on that with all of these other aspects, such as gratitude. Yeah. And then I guess the other comment is that I think the research says that the gratitude, although a lot of folks think that the benefit is conferred on the person like receiving that letter, it's actually much healthier. The benefits are actually stronger on the person writing it. For some reason, it could be catharsis, whatever. But yeah.
So I agree with you. I love that book, Transcend. I found that one to be just kind of a remarkable thinking exercise, talking about peak experiences, plateau experiences, that sort of thing, that Maslow talked about at the very tail end of his life. But if you think about it, savoring and gratitude do a good job of connecting you to something outside of yourself. Could be other people, it could be to nature, to God, to whatever it is that happens to be appropriate for you. And I think that that's part of why these particular concepts can be so powerful for people, is that there is a bit of a self-transcendence element to them.
Yeah, and the other thing you brought up too is I think positive psychology as a field is starting to recognize that emotions are all important, and you can't have goodness without light without dark, right? And so it's starting to really, yeah, the second wave movement of positive psychology is starting to balance those two, which is important.
And there is a good textbook on second wave positive psychology that I recommend. And post-traumatic growth is a perfect example of it. Kind of out of the darkness comes the light.
Yeah, that question of balance. We recently, among one of our leadership and harmonization meetings, did an exercise around meaning. Been interested in how do we talk about meaning in the work environment, which is something we typically don't do, and how can we foster that and encourage that as part of broader sort of wellness. And one of the things that when we were looking at that or in this exercise, it's not just about being happy, because it described the qualities of finding meaning. Transcendence was definitely one. Don't realize it till you reflect on it. So I'm really seeing these sort of themes. And poignancy, that a lot of times the meaning comes from something that at the time may have not felt all that great, but it's reflecting back on it that the meaning emerges. And so I think that just speaks to the balance thing, and something that, you know, we are trying to pay more attention to.
And Myra, there's meaning is another aspect of positive psychology, but it is not the easiest to develop it because meaning has a lot of meanings. And even just getting a definition that everyone agrees to is actually a fairly big challenge. But I would venture to say, and maybe you can chime in on this, that I think meaning is the common denominator for most of positive psychology.
Yeah, they also emphasize how individual it is. What's meaningful to you may be meaningless to me, and the episodic nature. It's not like an all the time kind of thing.
And interestingly, I think too, you mentioned not all poignant things are pleasant, right? That's a commonality in trauma therapies too, is helping people derive meaning out of what they've experienced and figuring out post-traumatic growth. So there's a lot of overlap there.
Anything online? Oh, nothing online.
Okay. Thank you, Ed and Amy. This was wonderful and such needed at this time. We appreciate you. And this concludes our department meeting. Thank you, everyone who came. Don't forget to fill out the surveys. Okay. Thank you.